allow me to just allude to our case study again this afternoon. What we saw at Newton Wellesley was they, in their state of emergency, had to determine which things do we have to put on hold since we're bleeding $1 million per month, and which of the things are going to generate revenue for us in the short term. A little aside that is not in your books, a piece of data that I saw recently is that what we're finding, actually one of the workshops that I facilitate, actually in addition to hospitals, I visit with organizations like Philips Medical Systems, right? So they make these devices. And what we're seeing is many hospitals who are using, let's say, higher-end CT technologies, many, not all, are not maximizing the technology at their fingertips. So in other words, what it means is some of them, let's say, who have a 16 slice, considering the purchase of a 64 slice. But we're seeing that their calendar is not even yet full for this device. They're not maximizing the capacity that they have at their hands. So it doesn't yet make sense for them to invest in another multi-$100,000 opportunity. And something else, tell me if you've seen something different, and that is, rare is it that organizations actually go back and do the ROI analysis, the return on investment, of how well that machine is working for them. Has anybody seen that happen? Have you? Where after the purchase, they go back and they say, well, let's see if this device is actually making the money that we projected it to make. Has anybody seen that happen?
We've done that once with the Pyxis machine.
Oh, you did do that once with the Pyxis. Okay. But is the point made, though? We make these investments, we have all these fancy projections, and then actually nobody actually checks to see if they are delivering what we ask them to deliver.
HCA and community do it religiously.
Wonderful model to borrow from.
Wayne Smith does it. Wayne Smith sees the ROI on every 18-month capital purchase over $1 million.
Perfect example. Great best practice. Okay. Boy, talking about, I mean, we do it in other areas of our lives. For those of us who track our own mutual funds or we track our own savings accounts, right? We track how much mileage our car is giving us, how much our car is depreciating. We do it for many other areas of our lives. In hospitals, not only in healthcare, but there are many missed opportunities to see, is this thing helping us or not? Anyway, another last point to make about the evolution moving so quickly in healthcare and technology, the challenge for us is where can we maximize this? Let me take you back to, as you know, I'm a little biased. I worked at Intel. So let me share with you a story from that company. One of the founders, Gordon Moore, right? This is now the 60s, 1960s. Anybody know Moore's Law? Tell us, or roughly speaking. Exactly right. King, and by the way, if I can step out of character, thanks for sharing that story about your experiences in Africa. So King of the Jungle, actually, in some senses, we could say here. I know he shared some good stories about his experiences in Kenya and in Zambia. So anyway, what happened, that's right, is in the 60s, Gordon Moore said that the number of transistors on a board would double every 6 months. So talk about the pace of change. How that has changed today is the number of instructions on a chip, and a chip these days is about the size of my pinky fingernail, will double every 18 months. So what does that mean for us? It means cell phones are much more, let's say, user-friendly. They have many more functions. Even though we get the chance to strike people on the head today when they go off, they can take photos. They can give us video. We saw a cell phone giving us video about the San Francisco throughway collapsing. Exactly. Talk about how those chips work in CT, how they work in traffic lights. All of this showing about the pace of change. Anyway, I've belabored that point. But the linkage then is the pace of change happens so quickly, so too does the number of requests for dollars to fund that kind of change. So in fact, I wonder, in fact, even if John may differ with me here, this data shows us that capital requests compared to available dollars, at least, let's say, we talked to many CFOs nationwide, and 90% of them said that I receive at least twice as many requests for funding than I have for dollars, in terms of dollars available. 50% of CFOs said I get 3 times as many requests as I have dollars available. So the point is, years ago when maybe somebody submitted a proposal and asked for, oh, we want to implement this new change, if you didn't get it that quarter, maybe it was at the bottom of the queue and you were sure to get that implemented in 2 quarters, but I imagine that doesn't happen so much anymore. Is that at all what happens here? Relevant,
Got
not
through
relevant?
the budget process, first of all, and yeah, that's probably twice, we get about twice the number of requests or the dollars that we have on the final budget. But yeah, we're strict. If it's not planned, it doesn't get done. So,
Okay.
in our situation, it's like in the 90% with that charge.
Okay.
When we start the budget process.
Yeah. So I guess, hint, hint, some of the things that come about as a result, if I hear you correctly, is need a lot of time for planning for these things long in advance because there's a process. We have to be cognizant of that. The data has to be constantly updated because of changing things like which technology is the best one for us. Are we using workhorse technology? Or are we tapping into something that we won't be able to maximize for another 10 years? All of those things impact how well we propose this idea for the hospital. So an example of how one organization did try to do the right thing, in fact, they looked at a specific specialty. So on paper, they said, ortho, this is what's going to drive great margins for us. And so this particular pseudonymed organization, we'll call them TJI, the Total Joint Institute, they decided to recruit specialists and they decided to actually implement this specialty area in this community. And on paper, again, it worked fine. But what they didn't do was a complete business analysis of how will that impact everything else, or what other areas will impact this proposal. So even though some of the procedures were seeing positive returns, they saw that some other aspects of their business planning weren't so accurate. And in fact, 2 in particular, so total joint replacements, losing money on each case, not what the business plan said. They were surprised. Hint, hint, allusion back to Newton Wellesley that we're going to see this afternoon. Boy, when estimates aren't accurate, when the data is not always up to speed, look at what could happen. So again, there you have that, the net income per patient in the red as opposed to the original projections. So the financial ruin, potentially a risk when we're not pursuing, let's say, the right technology or understanding how it can roll out here. So that's part of the reason it's appropriate to develop the right growth strategy. Right? These are, again, skills that are demanded from leaders like yourselves today. So managing business processes to adapt not only the new technologies, but the right technologies at the right time. And that will require more financial savvy from all of us, from our respective positions, whether we are in nursing or, again, in, let's say, environmental services or wherever we are, adding our perspective to the whole picture to give us a better sense of where we can maximize cutting costs or generating revenue. And that's a good segue. Talking about unrelenting margin pressure. So here's the 5th of 5 phenomena. Notice that there is good news trending upward from the left to the right in terms of the median hospital operating margin nationwide. This data comes to us from 2 different, let's say, financial services companies or specifically bond rating bodies. They just have slightly different metrics. And what they see is, again, in terms of operating margin, at about today we're at about the 3% mark. The daunting news is that we're still nowhere near we were in the late 90s. And we know there were significant events that took place. I mean, we could look at terrorism, we could look at the fall of the stock market, but even kind of scarier is look at the recommended target margin that we are recommending, the advisory board for hospitals nationwide and other organizations, 4.5%. Few hospitals are there. Opportunity to say congratulations here, right? What's the margin, roughly speaking? 7, 8%? Great. That's a success. Definitely take stock in the success. Think about what you're doing well. Continue doing it. Though, a cautionary note, even great hospitals, due to a moment's inattention, can see this go down, right? So great. So keep up the good work there. What we're also seeing is pushing out, let's say, 15 years, looking at Medicare solvency. So in other words, when this fund of money that was meant to keep us safe and cozy until our final days is projected to run out. Well, there are some pundits who say that, well, it's 2026. But with the way those previous phenomena are playing out in our country, it's looking like that may dry up a little earlier than had been expected. In fact, if we even look at 3 different scenarios of future Medicare payment updates in terms of, so reimbursement, a full market basket means fully reimbursing 100% of costs, okay? What's happening, increasingly likely, it's going to be a full market basket minus a certain percentage of that cost. So of course, what that means for us is we're going to have to foot that bill in some way, shape, or form. And the unlikely, although we say let's say an aggressive scenario is full market basket minus a larger percentage. So you can stake your claim in any one of those 3 places. We just share those with you to say, look, these are the different scenarios. But what's most likely is that there's not going to be a complete reimbursement there. And as a result, hospitals borrow more. Looking across long-term debt, let's say this decade, we can see how those numbers increase, as a result, putting more pressure on the annual debt service burden. Pushing forward even to the end of last year, about $12 million in terms of annual debt service burden. That's what happens when we borrow more, not unlike our credit card, right? There's more every month. We're paying a higher percentage. The interesting thing then is if we are spending more to borrow, we'll have to find out how to generate revenues. There's been mixed success. Here's an example of that. A list of emerging service line killers. Kind of ironically named because there are some fantastic technologies here, like drug-eluting stents. When that works well, it's great for the patient, right? The patient, in essence, doesn't have to come back to be seen as often when it works well. So in essence, from a financial perspective, maybe not so great because we don't get to, again, generate revenue from those additional visits. So this is causing the volumes to go down. There's some erosion, and we'll have to figure out, okay, well, where else are these revenues going to come from? In fact, when we look at that, let's call it innovation erosion on the facing page, when focusing on hospital operating margin, first note that it's happening. That's the only reason I mention it to you. So even though we advance in some ways in medicine, it doesn't necessarily mean we advance in terms of the financial health of the organization. Compounded by the fact that, for many other reasons, there's this great unfunded mandate. Many hospitals, like yourselves, have to pay for care for people in your community who can't afford to pay. So it's causing this wider gap between, of course, revenue and cost reduction. The goal then is looking at this window. You've got a current operating margin between revenues and costs. The challenge to us then is how do we limit one, in other words, the costs, while at the same time increasing the revenues, creating a wider window within which to operate, within which to fund future technologies, within which to fund future growth. So that's the profit imperative. Leading us with our 5th and final set of challenges in the State of the Union today, make sure we're making the right investment decisions, basically understanding our financial rearview mirror, which is often the best indicator of our financial, let's say, windscreen ahead of us, so we can redesign processes to improve efficiencies, to do both of those things at the same time. That is, cutting costs and increasing revenues. So I've just talked a lot. Maybe I put you to sleep. Let me stop there for one moment. I'm going to open this discussion open to the floor, and I'm going to ask you to first breathe a little, take in some of this information. Which, if any, of those 5 phenomena is not relevant here? And forgive me, for those who can't see this, I've just listed the 5 phenomena we've just spoken about on this flip chart. Are any of these not relevant here? Okay. Then which one or ones are most relevant here?
I think emerging technology is the least relevant. I think all the other ones probably are tied for first place. Yeah.
A little louder, Danny?
We're working in that emerging technology is pretty good. We've got a pretty good
Okay.
jump on that, I think.
If we're trying to prioritize, you might have to put the physicians and the quality and safety as the two of the top
I
ones
think I agree.
for us.
I'll just put a high and a high there.
Number one.
If we don't do that, then margin pressure is going to be
Right now, it's
moved up the list.
How are your volumes?
Could be better.
Could be better. Okay. So obviously you see the interdependence there. Well, then any other comments at the moment for these 5 phenomena? And by the way, were there any exceptions to the data that I shared with you that you are seeing?
I've got a comment on the graph you had on hospital margin stabilizing. You see the dip. That was after the VBA in 1998. And then you had the repeal of that. And you started to see the margin increase a little. So a lot of it's government driven. We're so heavily dependent on the government payers, Medicare, federal aid, state Medicaid. You know, and we're kind of at their mercy, if you will. So after the government regulations in 1998 drove the margins down, we got outpatient prospective payment in 2000. I think that's when it hit the bottom. And you had the repeal of the VBA, and then you started seeing margins going up a little. The government started paying better after hospitals, private, Congress, et cetera. Not only hospitals, but physicians also. So a lot of it is dependent on things we can control, government regulations. So then that forces us to change initiatives. You know, if they're gonna reduce reimbursement, they've gotta look at cost a lot stricter. And services.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of it, I mean, I guess to summarize it, I mean, a lot of it's driven by government regulations, just because of the environment that we're in.
Yeah. Any responses to that comment? I mean, I have a few, but let's hear from the rest of you.
One thing I think you need to be aware of, Jim, in our particular market, until about 4 years ago, our goal was to be the low-cost provider. Our board was heavily made up of people who manage the industry. It was their best interest for our cost to be low. So therefore, our charges were very low. The great volume we're having, if you look at where our volumes were about 3 years ago, we were in the 3 and 2% range. John took an opportunity, he saw an opportunity to raise rates. We raised rates 25% in one, 25% in one
year.
10% a couple of points after that, which has, with about the same volume, where we've gotten most of our margin. We're at that, we were able to take advantage of the situation. Many hospitals were not able to. On the demand for services, it's an issue for our community because there's more demand for services than we're providing. And we have out-migration, considerable out-migration from our community. So ours, where there's a multi-hospital community, ours is a little bit different in that we're not meeting demands of our community, which is an issue with our physicians, because it's putting pressure on us to bring more physicians and get into their pocketbooks even more. It makes us a little bit unique than many hospitals around the country.
Mm-hmm.
We would have, if we're doing pluses and minuses, demand for services is something we would be a minus on where we stand, where we're trending.
Mhm.
But driving some of the issues.
Okay. Okay.
So that's my opinion. You all may differ.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
thinking the same thing. We're really dependent on that physician group, or we're really gonna be hurting on the center. We don't put it in physician.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is it's very much interdependent. They're connected. So then in kind of closing this section, the coda or the summary is looking at these 5 different areas, as you just mentioned. They are interconnected. You have some of your challenges before you. Actually, to John's point, what I'm seeing, I'll share an example of a hospital that I know that I visited in Wisconsin. They're called Divine Savior, and this is public information. It's a very sad story. What happened was because of the changes, because of the government changes, what happened was their estimates for reimbursement turned out that they were receiving $1 million less per month than they had projected. So you know how that story ends. Unfortunately, I was facilitating a workshop for them in December last year, and they announced layoffs the week before I got there. And they couldn't sustain that kind of cost pressure, right? So they had to make some significant changes. So yes, in every community it's different. I think one of the points, or 2 of the points we'd like to make is I go back to one of those slides, whereas, right, the reimbursement is going to change, right? And so the pressure is more on us. How do we create revenue? How do we take control of it ourselves and come up with these opportunities to continue to have such a strong margin? So basically, we're going to be borrowing some models from inside of healthcare and outside of healthcare, because without that margin mission balance, we really don't have much else to do. We can kind of go home. So that's one of the challenges. Looking at expanding treatment options, everything from funding that unfunded mandate, some of the things that you've been discussing, it will require of you as individuals to supplement your existing skill set and or to share some of the strengths that you have with your colleagues. It's, I'll do my part, you'll do your part. In other words, what we're really talking about here, it's that fabric, weaving the fabric of all the skills that are in this room here together into one kind of holistic piece that helps this hospital provide great care at the end of the day. So not an easy, let's say, challenge for anyone. So that's where we conclude our State of the Union. Again, I ask you, let me know if you have any closing thoughts or comments before we go into our next section. That was meant to give you a backdrop of maybe why and where some of these things are happening nationwide and where this community might fit into some of those phenomena. Okay? Well then, what I would like to do is, before we get into our next section, so this was our State of the Union. We've just gone through that. The next section is going to be taking a look at 6 specific leadership styles. But before I do that, a little commercial for you. How many of you have been able to get to the Advisory Board website so far? Okay, some of you. Okay, those who have not, here's how you can do it. I'll walk you through this briefly to make sure that you can tap into all the resources that we have available for you. They're research tools, there are training tools, there are financial calculators, there are how to hire guides, checklists, anything, everything you ever wanted to know about healthcare but were afraid to ask. So first, just go to advisory.com. You'll get a page that looks something like this, and you will plug in your email address. In the box on the lower left, your password, you can try at the beginning, is guest. If that doesn't get you in, you can click here, typing in your password, and the system will send you an email address. Will send you a password so you can get in. Once you're in, and by the way, you need to use your Upson Regional email address. Those are the only ones that we have in our system. And tell me, by the way, if for some reason any of you have tried to get in and couldn't, definitely talk to me. Talk to Sue so we make sure that you don't have a problem. I want to make sure this is easy for you to get into. So you'll put in all your personal information. Then once you're in, it looks something like this. We are part of one of the 5 leadership academies that we offer. At the top of your documents, you see it says the Performance Leadership Academy. We have others. We have the Physician Leadership, Nursing Leadership Academy, Center for Frontline, the Academy Fellowship. So there are 5. And actually, I facilitate discussions in 3 of them. This one, the Nursing Leadership Academy, and the Physician Leadership Academy. Ours, again, The one that we can see here is the Performance Leadership Academy, and that you can click here, and it'll take you to everything that we have to offer for you. There are some teleconferences. You can listen in to some that might be available for you on everything from how do we improve operating margin to how do I enhance recruitment? How do I enhance retention? What are other dietary managers doing nationwide to provide better services? On the lower left-hand corner, there's a little space you can click. It says email alerts, and I know this is hard for some of you to see all the way in the back. Email alerts are things that pop up into your email box if you so click on them. It's everything from, there's a daily alert. It'll take you to this box. If you just click on that, every day in your email box, you'll get a daily briefing. It's not unlike this one. And it's about 7 pages. And now you're thinking, when will I ever have time to read this? And I agree with you. So the way it actually comes up, we tried to be very time sensitive to help you with, again, managing your time, because we know that you're very busy. So the way it comes in your email box is it's just a list of headlines. So when it comes in, just scan the headlines, see what's relevant for you. It's got different topics. Again, everything from clinical research to Around the Nation, Finance Watch, retail clinics, ED, boarding, length of stay, stroke. Revolution Health Group. Let me tell you about this one. This particular daily briefing came out about a week ago, and this is, we call it again, it's the nation's news in 5 minutes. Revolution Health is a company that just got started recently. I think I shared this with the senior team when I came a few weeks ago. Has anybody heard of Revolution Health? Just on the horizon. I find them fascinating because their CEO is a man named Steve Case. That name might ring a bell. He's somebody who used to be the head of AOL, America Online. Why is that important, and what's the parallel? Because he's using that business model. Again, AOL was providing consumer-based information to us as consumers. Like in the 90s, if we wanted to pay $20 a month, we can get all this information within AOL that would give me my sports information, my shopping information, my news, my weather, my directions, all of that. He kind of put that into a walled garden. Well, suddenly in the late 90s, when the internet opened wide up and everybody could just surf the internet themselves, suddenly we didn't need to pay $20 for that AOL service anymore, and we know what happened to AOL. And Steve, not a, let's say a very intelligent person, realized that that was not working anymore, and he moved on, and he's bringing that same model to healthcare. So in other words, he's creating a consumer-oriented site where people can go and see how other doctors performed before they buy services. They also have wellness programs, and I see there are some people here who are focusing on wellness. They're also focusing on other kind of specialty areas. Take a look at Revolution Health. Again, I don't get a commission for talking about them. I think it's an interesting model because also on their board, they have some other little-known personalities like Carly Fiorina, who is the former head of HP. All of these people focusing on healthcare and realizing that in our country we need to do a better job of it. And somebody else that you may have heard of, Colin Powell. Colin Powell is there, as you know, somebody who is a strong advocate, or maybe you didn't know, for healthcare today. And think about the kind of weight on that board and why they're saying healthcare is important. Really just sends a strong message. So one of the things, my buddy actually just happens to work at Revolution Health, and he sent me a beta site. He said, Jim, try this out for any hospital service you received recently. And I had knee surgery a year ago, so I clicked on Maryland, and I found Dr. Stephen Rockhauer. So knee surgeon, and I gave him a 4 out of 5 stars for service and something else. So now, just like Amazon, somebody else after me can go in there and say, oh, Dr. Steve Rockhauer, and I can see how many people liked him or didn't. So it's about transparency again. So long-winded story about a service that is available to you. That's a snapshot of what the daily briefing looks like. Last note, you can search anything you like. Plug in your word of choice, physician outreach, succession planning, clinical trials. We have a database of about 30 years of studies that may be helpful for you. Plug in, again, wound control, Georgia, and see what hospitals pop up. So, the blue document I mentioned to you earlier, that Harvard Business Review tool, these are online learning segments. They take about 3 hours. If you do each one in its entirety, You don't have to do that. Instead, pick a course you want to learn more about, like giving feedback, leading a team, implementing strategy, writing a business plan, and then maybe jump to the chase and do the 10-question test. If you get an 80 on it, great, then just read that section. If you get a 20, get a cup of coffee, get a pillow, maybe just get a little comfortable, spend a little more time. So there are some resources that are there for you. Again, all free, just part of the relationship. Questions? Okay. Well then, if you would, you have a set of leadership cards in front of you. They look like this, hermetically sealed. Please open them now. What I am going to do is walk you through these 6 leaders' styles. And notice that on the back of the page, there's a little set of descriptors for each leader. Bless you. Some of these people you may recognize. Some of them you may never have heard of before. But as I walk through each of these 6, think about which pieces of their style you attach to, which piece you may not attach to so much, and, of course, which of these attributes might be helpful in healthcare today. Does anybody not have a set of leadership cards? Okay. Let me start with the first one. Richard Branson, President and CEO of Virgin Atlantic. Let's say an adventure capitalist and grand self-promoter. He dreams big, thinking outside the box, and wants to try the impossible. Everything from a Virgin Megastore to Virgin Brides to Virgin Cola. We know he's had an enormous amount of success, multi-billionaire. In fact, if we were to turn back the clock to his earlier days when he was a student, he was such an entrepreneur. One of his professors noted about him, Richard, when you grow up, you're either going to be a millionaire or land in prison. And we know, actually, the former was the one that happened. In fact, when he was 17 years old, he created this National Student Magazine, which was a mix of a music research and an economic piece to share. So his growth and, let's say, knowledge of how to get big names to participate was something, or a skill that he was able to tap into at a very early age. So people like John Lennon were amongst his interviewee list. He continued along that path. In fact, one of his business ventures, Virgin Atlantic, he went against the grain. The industry norm there was to streamline costs, to provide, let's say, flights on a regular basis, not necessarily focused on great quality, but instead he offered a different Virgin approach, and that was wider seats, in-flight amenities, such as manicures, massages, special packages for newlyweds, wide seats. What he did, one of the ways he came up with great ideas was he solicited that information from employees by keeping them informed about what was going on. In fact, on his website, he asked people to share information with him. Some of those ideas he actually did launch, taking him to his far-reaching empire, looking back 40 years or so from when he published that newspaper, that national magazine, all the way through some of his different services. Some of those things were enormously successful. Some of them were not so successful, like his mobile phone business. But nonetheless, we know things have happened that seemed impossible, like providing the commercial service to space. Well, Richard Branson, visionary, willing to defy conventional wisdom and strategy. Taking us to our second leader, Patrick O'Connell, executive chef and co-proprietor at the Inn at Little Washington. An extreme perfectionist, some would argue even manic about how perfectionist he is. Meticulous is his middle name, focused always on satisfaction. In fact, few people believed that his idea would ever take flight, but it did. In fact, just outside Washington, D.C., well, a little further outside Washington, D.C., he launched this very small 8-room inn and a very small adjoining dining room. He focused on the niche customer. Notice just a modification, neither wrong nor right, But one of the things that Gene mentioned earlier, your competitive niche was to focus on low cost, right? Great quality at low cost. We've seen that model elsewhere. Fantastic. He chose a different niche. So meals starting at about $140 per entree, roughly speaking, focusing on haute couture. In fact, look at his kitchen, how he made that run like clockwork. Every single stage of the experience crafted behind the scenes, marked very clearly. In fact, even when chopping parsley, each chef had to sign off on